Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar on nuclear cultural heritage, which is organized in the context of the RICOMET 2021 conference. It is actually the first time in the history of RICOMET that we are organizing a session which is fully dedicated to the topic of nuclear cultural heritage. And well, we are delighted to see the number of people who have registered for this session, and also delighted to have a panel of outstanding experts in this field with us today. So it really shows that it is a timely topic to be addressing here today. I am Robert Geesmans from the Belgium Nuclear Research Center, SHARE, and I will be moderating today's event. And actually, in my background, you can already see a picture of some of SEK Sense nuclear heritage. So this is the control room of the BR3 reactor, which has now been decommissioned, but which was the first pressurized water reactor in Western Europe. So before we move on to the presentations of our experts, I will provide some practical information on this session. First of all, you should know that this session is being recorded and that the recording will be made available afterwards on the SHARE and the RICOMET website, so you can always come back to it afterwards. Second, the session consists of two main parts. So first of all, we will start with presentations of our experts who will provide their views, ideas, and opinions on nuclear cultural heritage from different perspectives. And then basically the input comes from you. So then we will have a panel discussion in which you as an audience member can ask questions to our panel. You can ask these questions because it is a webinar format. You can ask these questions through the chat and through the Q&A function. As an audience member, you cannot use your webcam nor your microphone, but we are very happy to get all of your questions and comments through the chat or the Q&A, and we have a chat moderator who will make sure that we get your questions to the panel. Okay, so I think these are all the practicalities that we need to get out of the way before we can start. So, well, without much further ado, we can now turn to actually already our first presenter, which is Egle Rindzeviciute. Egle is an associate professor of criminology and sociology at Kingston University in the UK. Among other things, she is also the principal investigator of the Nuclear Spaces Project, which deals with communities, materialities, and locations of nuclear cultural heritage. And of course, as co-organizer of today's session, she has also provided great help in making this webinar possible. So Egle, I give the word to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert. Just let me share my screen first. Wait. Okay. Do you see my slides okay? And can you hear me okay?
Yes, this is perfectly fine.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. It is really wonderful to be here. And I would like to thank the organizers at SHARE and RICOMET, and particularly Dr. Rob Geesmans and Professor Tanya Perko for inviting me to take part in this discussion panel. In my presentation, I will explain what I mean by nuclear cultural heritage, and I will present several types of nuclear cultural heritage making. The ideas on which this presentation is based are informed by several research projects which are in progress and which I've been developing in collaboration with partners in the UK, Sweden, and Lithuania. And please do not hesitate to get in touch with me if you would like to hear more about these project activities. So, what is nuclear cultural heritage? How can we think about it? This is based broadly on a position paper on nuclear cultural heritage, which was developed as part of my project. So one thing is important to keep in mind is that nuclear cultural heritage is shaped by many different institutions, museums, archives, heritage sites, arts, as well as in a more corporate context of nuclear establishments. And it also emerges in the social context of residents in atomic towns and regions. The making of nuclear cultural heritage is not a simple top-down process, but it is a very complex practice where the state, the industry, and civil society interact. Therefore, different forms of nuclear cultural heritage can have different values for the users, or should I use a better word, co-creators. So, for instance, a public value for society by revealing their complex history and providing forms of engaging with the history and the future. It can have also an internal operational use value for nuclear establishments by improving nuclear decommissioning process. It can also have an external engagement value for the nuclear establishments that are seeking to communicate with different stakeholder groups, and not only communities of residents, but also communities of policymakers and politicians. So what are the forms of nuclear cultural heritage? Let me give you just a few examples. And the first ones are coming from Russia, a country that I have been studying in the last 6 years, and where a lot of development in this field are taking place. So, for instance, the Soviet Russian nuclear past can be presented in many forms of techno-scientific innovation in the nuclear field. For instance, nuclear reactors, icebreakers, mock-ups or shells of atomic bombs. But it could also be, like this example, memorial offices of prominent scholars such as Chlopin, who was promoting establishing the field of radium research, or memorial houses of key scientists such as the memorial house of Kurchatov in central Moscow that you can see in these pictures. Nuclear cultural heritage may also involve vast landscapes and sites. So it's not just technical installations, architectures, and objects. A great example is the Erzgebirge Krushnohory mining region, which is also included in UNESCO World Heritage List, and about which we will hear more in this session. Located in Germany, on German-Czech border, very important uranium mining area. Or, for instance, UK's atomic weapons research establishment's ballistics testing site, Orford Ness. Now this is managed by National Trust, a very interesting natural and technical history site. In this and other sites, nuclear cultural heritage is not only celebration of techno-scientific innovation, as you can imagine. It is also a way of dealing with the difficult past. For instance, the UNESCO list of World Heritage features Hiroshima Peace Memorial, inscribed in this list in 1996, and Bikini Atoll nuclear test site, inscribed in 2010. And we will hear more in this session about the initiative to inscribe Chernobyl in this World Heritage List. So these are just a few examples of a diversity of nuclear cultural heritage. What is really most important, the point that I want to make in this very, very brief introduction, is that nuclear infrastructure must be considered as key cultural legacy of techno-scientific modernization all across the world. And accordingly, the emerging forms of nuclear cultural heritage were not just embellishment on the top of history making, but they are very important efforts, interinstitutional efforts to address not only the complex legacy of the past. It's wonderful to have a history and some preservation, but it's also a way of creating solid and safe foundations to face the future, including, but not limiting, radioactive waste governance and decommissioning of nuclear facilities and entire regions. And I will stop here, and thank you for listening. And I guess that it will be time now to move to our next presentation.
Yes, thank you, Egle, for this very interesting introduction. So next up, we have Mr. Vladimir Michal. Vladimir works at the IAEA, where he is the decommissioning team leader at the section on decommissioning and environmental remediation. So he will present to us the IAEA view on nuclear heritage, particularly as part of nuclear decommissioning, and will also provide quite some practical examples from his experience. So Vladimir, I give you the word.
Thank you so much. I go to the first slide. Just a second. Good. Can you please confirm that you can see the presentation and you can hear me?
Yes, we can both see the presentation and hear you.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon, all participants. My name is Vladimir Michal. I'm the commissioning team leader in the IAEA, in the Department of Nuclear Energy. and I am very pleased to provide you with my presentation on considerations of nuclear heritage in decommissioning. First of all, a couple of introduction of what is nuclear decommissioning about in line with the IAEA terminology. The terms sitting, design, construction, commissioning, operation, and decommissioning are normally used to delineate the 6 major stages in the lifetime of an authorized facility and of the associated licensing process. The decommissioning is a normal last phase of the life cycle of nuclear facility that cannot be avoided. In line with the agency definition, the term decommissioning refers to the administrative and technical actions taken to allow the removal of some or all of the regulatory controls from a facility. I believe that it is very important because it is in fact means that nuclear facilities does not to be fully dismantled or demolished, but it may be kept, for example, as a nuclear heritage or reused, redeveloped, etc. Aspects of decommissioning have to be considered throughout the other 5 major stages. So thinking and planning in advance is really very important. Some other related considerations, the main strategies, recognized strategies for decommissioning are immediate versus deferred dismantling, or combination of both. Immediate means that decommissioning will start without any significant delay after the operation is over. And deferred dismantling means that the nuclear facility is placed into the safe enclosure for some decades and final dismantling is done later. We have also some publications on the topic. There was published a Nuclear Energy Series report on redevelopment and reuse of nuclear facilities and sites that includes many case studies, case histories, and lessons learned. And also the considerations on reuse of the facility are introduced in a specific safety guide number 47 on decommissioning of nuclear power plants, research reactors, and other nuclear facilities. And concerning existing options or case studies that we can see in many examples worldwide, those are that nuclear facility is reused or part of it reused as a technical information center, as an atomic museum. Some specific building may remain because they do have significant architectural value, or they can be reused for many other purposes. I included here also a couple of examples. The first 2 examples are from France. The first one is CA Marcoule, what is a French research organization, nuclear organization. There is a G1 reactor premises info center in the place. G1 was first large graphite reactor of CA, and the premises are now reused as a Espace Infodem, nice exhibition hall, and also place can be used for professional events, exhibition, and so on. Very worth to visit. Another example is Chinon A1, what was one of the first French nuclear power plants, where atomic museum was opened in 1986. It is under the control and operation of EDF, so it can be visited, and there are models of real staff working as during the operation. Another 2 examples are from Russia and from United States. It was already mentioned, F1 Reactor Museum in Kurchatov Institute. Actually, F1 was the first research reactor in operation in former Soviet Union. And in Obninsk, there was the first nuclear power plant in operation. There is still Obninsk Museum. The plant itself has been decommissioned, but the museum remains. And another example is from USA, National Museum of Nuclear Science and History, placed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. As you know, it was the state where first nuclear explosions were held. Another 2 examples are from power plants. The first one is a very nice Italian city with the nuclear power plant Garigliano. that is operated by national companies. Sojin operated, the plant itself is in decommissioning. However, it was decided many years ago that this containment, what you can see as a large golf ball, will be decontaminated, but it will remain because it was designed by famous Italian architecture, and it has a significant value for the future generations. Below example is a screenshot of corporate report of Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, what is authority in UK that is supervising decommissioning activities in the country. And this is one example. It is a Dounreay Heritage Annual Report. Dounreay is one of the sites of UK. It is in North Scotland. And it is the report where is proposed some heritage strategy and descriptions of the equipment that will remain for the future. And I think that these are my last examples. The upper one is from Sweden. It is about conventional use of R1 reactor premises. R1 was the first research reactor in Sweden. It was dismantled. However, premises are so cool that they are used for variety of art exhibitions, laser show, big events, with many people, because these premises are interesting and they do have a certain artistic value. And last example, I was not able to resist to provide you with this example. You know very well that Austria is a non-nuclear country. However, they built some years ago, well, actually many years ago, nuclear power plant, Zwentendorf. It's matter of fact, it was never commissioned, it was never in operation because public referendum decided to do so. The place is very close to Vienna. And as you can see, this picture was done by me. As you can see, it still exists. It is now reused as a technical museum. There were solar panels installed to produce some electricity. And in fact, the site is open for sporting activities, and it is a very nice place to go, very nice place to the Blue Danube. So it was my last example. It concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be here for the Q&A session. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. With regard to the Q&A session, so I once again invite everyone to post their whatever questions or comments they might have in either the chat or the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. So with Vladimir's presentation now behind us, we can now turn to Cornelius Holturf. Cornelius is a professor of archaeology at Linnaeus University in Sweden, and there he also holds the UNESCO chair on heritage futures. In his presentation, Cornelius will talk about heritage issues related particularly to the case also of nuclear waste disposal sites. So Cornelius, I give the word to you and to your high-tech way of presenting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert, for this, and also to Egle for bringing us all together here in this group. And well, I want to talk about nuclear waste disposal sites from another perspective regarding these issues of heritage. Are these potentially innovative World Heritage Sites for the Anthropocene? And the context in which I'm presenting this is which Robert just mentioned, the UNESCO Chair on Heritage Futures. And I will come back at the very end to what this term heritage futures actually means, because it is a bit an abstract thing that it may not be immediately understandable, but I think in the end it will all fall into place. But what I should say now is that none of what I'm saying represents the views of UNESCO. And I think later on you will understand why I'm saying this. This is also part of the obligations when you have a chair like this. So the session abstract asks us to present our views on how cultural heritage site how nuclear sites could evolve into heritage sites. And we've already heard some examples in the previous presentations. Now, what I'm saying on this is that some nuclear sites should become heritage, and in the case I will be talking about should become World Heritage, not because they will remind people of the past, although that is of course an initial starting point, and we've heard great examples in both the previous talks already on what they could represent from our past. But I think there's another quality to some nuclear sites, and that's because they can help us create a better human future. And I think that's the angle I want to explore in this presentation. Now, specifically, I want to focus on nuclear waste deposits and argue that they make for better World Heritage sites than the present sites that are on the famous UNESCO list. So that's going to be the argument. Why am I saying this? Well, if we look back at why is there a World Heritage list at all, then of course this is one of the outcomes of UNESCO, and it helps UNESCO to fulfill its aims. And if you want to look what UNESCO wants to do, then the obvious starting point is to look at the Constitution of UNESCO from 1945. And in that constitution, it is crystal clear that the organization was founded in order to build peace in the minds of humans. And there is this famous quote that I think you've all come across before, which UNESCO sort of uses a lot. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And these days, obviously, we can't use the term men anymore, so let's read this as humans, more inclusive. So that is the intention of UNESCO. And if we read on in the Constitution, then it is clear that the motivation for all its activities is to fight suspicion and mistrust between the peoples of the world. Because in their analysis, the people who founded UNESCO, this was a fundamental reason why two major wars had started during the first half of the 20th century. And I want to reach this to fight mistrust by promoting collaboration among the nations through education, science, and culture. That's the remit of UNESCO. And again, this is a quote from the Constitution. And so how do they do that? Well, one of the means to which they do that, so there's a long list, different things, but one of them is that they want to reach this by assuring the conservation and protection of the world's inheritance of monuments of history. Now, at that time, people didn't use the term heritage, but that is what they mean. So eventually, the World Heritage Convention is an answer to the need of UNESCO to build peace in the world and foster global collaboration and fight mistrust. And the overarching criterion for enlisting, according to the World Heritage Convention, is outstanding universal value. And the idea is that this sort of value would transcend national boundaries and well, emphasize everything that goes beyond the nations. Now, there are many other people than me who've come to the conclusion that in practice, it doesn't quite work like that. In reality, so World Heritage sites mainly support national pride these days, and of course also some economic interests in the world. And that's very clear when you look at how the World Heritage Convention accepts new sites to the list every year in their meetings. And it is also expressed in illustrations like this one, which are very commonplace. Now, I'm sure you've all seen similar, if not the same image before. It's like in the Olympic Games, like you count medals for different countries. And at the moment, and for some years, there has been a race between Italy and China, for example, on which country has got more World Heritage sites. And this is, well, certainly in China, it's part of its major foreign policy goal to reach the top of the list. And of course, there are a lot of reasons why this also makes sense. But the list goes on, and many other countries, most of them in Europe, will have a lot of World Heritage sites. And very often the news about new World Heritage sites are presented in those terms, that our country got yet another one, or some other country got 5 more, and so on. So it's very much about national achievements, and it's not about universal value in any sort of meaningful sense. So what could one do? well, what I'm arguing is that, and also another context also to UNESCO, is that OUV, which is the shortcut for outstanding universal value, should reflect actually the aims of UNESCO. And that means that World Heritage Sites should represent global instead of national values in the first instance. Sorry, just one idea. Backtrack to this image. At the moment, it's the case that national heritage site gets sort of the extra label of being globally significant, and that increases the value nationally, and the countries become extra proud of their sites. But I think it should be exactly the other way around, that the global dimension should be translated back into the national, should be localized in a specific place. This is where the global values becomes evident, and that's what we should celebrate rather than the national pride about something. And I think that World Heritage Sites should also add to these two aims of UNESCO. They should contribute to fighting suspicion and mistrust between people, and they should promoting collaboration among nations. And at the moment, we can't really see how the existing World Heritage Sites are contributing to these aims. So here's my argument. Nuclear waste deposits, I think they have many of these qualities. They certainly are about global energy provision during the 20th and 21st centuries. And that covers a huge sort of economic and technical aspect. It's about progress, and it's about, of course, also about big companies and the interests behind it. But it's also about politics in many countries up to today, to a large extent. And one of the things we shouldn't forget is that the entire environmental movement was to, not exclusively, of course, but to a large extent came into being through the anti-nuclear movement. There's a strong connection in these movements, and that's one of the reasons why we could celebrate these changes that we've seen in politics at the example of nuclear waste that has attracted so much controversy and conflict also in some countries during the last few decades. And so that's also part of the political significance, which I think is worthwhile remembering and indeed celebrating at places like this. And then there's another term which I like. Peter van Wyk called nuclear waste repositories. They called them the archive of the Anthropocene. And I think that's a very nice way of putting it, that you can see it also represents attitudes that people have and certain values and social practices that have gone on in many societies around the world, not all of them, but many. And that becomes concrete and manifested in these sites also. And that's very closely connected to what we associated with this notion of the Anthropocene today. So there is a very clear global dimension in nuclear waste. And I would also like to emphasize, based on my experience, that I've now been collaborating with the and contributing to the to issues about nuclear waste disposal within the Nuclear Energy Agency for more than 10 years. And in that context, also, of course, in other organizations like the IAEA, and there are several other bodies that deal with these questions, I think you can say there's a very long-standing and in some cases very intensive collaboration among nations. And there's really a sense of that we together need to find the best solutions for everybody. That's not always easy, but there is a serious concern, and lots of people are working on this in very interesting ways, which I've certainly been impressed by. So that is also a value, I think, that nuclear waste embodies, because the particular solutions that eventually will be found, we hope, they are based on long-term consultations between many experts and bodies and interests globally. So that's why I'm arguing that nuclear waste deposits, they're not only about long-term safety, although that's of course also on our minds. And they're not only about remembering the nuclear age in the sense that we heard examples and in fact arguments from Egle and from Vladimir also on these issues, although that's also one aspect of them. But on top of these two aspects. I think they're also about human values and arguably about priorities we should have for the future, because they can embody some of that in very original and powerful ways. And in my mind, that's what makes them worthy World Heritage. And that these are the aspects that such a nomination and enlisting could embody and help contribute to communicate to large audiences around the world. So I'm at the end, and I promised you I should return back to this notion of heritage futures and what that means. Well, our definition of heritage futures is that that's a term that, or it signifies the roles of heritage in managing the relations between present and future societies. So it is about what heritage can contribute to affect and maybe also express to some extent how the present looks at the future. And I think, given my argument thus far, you know now how I think like this in practical terms, and which contribution nuclear waste deposits could make to that, because I think they're one of the very most best suited kind of sites that do exactly that. They embody how we've been thinking and how different people have been thinking about the future in recent decades. And I think that's worthwhile celebrating. And that's why this is a prime example, I think, for heritage futures, and fits also so nicely into this session. So thank you all very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and your questions later on.
Okay, many thanks, Cornelius, for this very interesting and, well, again, very flashy presentation. I'm always admiring the presentation style with all of the words coming up on the screen. No idea how you do it, but it looks magical. Okay, so our fourth speaker is Professor Helmut Albrecht. Helmut is a professor at the Technical University Mining Academy in Freiberg in Germany. And there he is also the director of the Institute for Industrial Archaeology and for History of Science and Technology. So Helmut, I'm very happy that you are here with us, because you're currently on a mission actually for the UNESCO. So I'm very happy that you made it, and I gladly give the word to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to start my presentation. I hope it all works. Where is it? One moment. One moment. Where is it gone? I'm looking, sorry for this.
No problem, no problem. If you say that it's easier for you that we share it, that's also possible, of course. So
no, I can share it. It takes a few seconds.
We have all the time.
Okay, it will come up soon. Okay, I think this will work now.
Yes, it's indeed coming up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to go to the presentation models. Okay, sorry for this delay. As Egle mentioned in her presentation, I'm going to present you a World Heritage cultural landscape, industrial cultural landscape in the Ore Mountain region, and I think it meets some of the goals Cornelius just told us, because it's a transnational nomination and about a story which is political for political, social, and other reasons. During the history, a very problematical story about two different nations, the Czech on the Czech side, the Bohemian side, and on the German, on the Saxon side. And this project was developed to to break open the borders and to give way for discussions and to deal with this history, with this very controversial history in the past, and to bring this discussion into the present and to help to break open the windows for a better understanding of both people on both sides of the border. What I'm presenting you is not the whole German-Czech World Heritage Cultural Landscape, Erzgebirge, Krušnohoří mining region, only a part. It deals about ore mining over 800 years, since the Middle Ages up to the 20th century, end of the 20th century. And one part of this story, the last part of the story, is uranium mining after 1945. And I'm going to present you what we have done with these remains of uranium mining, a very problematical story, because first started with prisoners and so on, and political prisoners, war prisoners, and so on. And first it was thought we shouldn't integrate it into this World Heritage Site, but from the starting on, my position was it's a part of the history of this area. Okay, let's go into this thing. You see here, this is the layout of 22 component parts of the World Heritage Site, which takes over areas and monuments of 800 years of mining, ore mining, silver, tin, iron, up to cobalt, up to uranium, and I marked the areas where uranium mining was taken since 1945. The discovery of uranium and radon and radium is located in this area, and the story of uranium is closely connected to this area. Here you see it, the discovery of pitch blende, how it was called from the miners, because they cannot use it, was in the 16th century in this area. And also the discovery of the element uranium took place in a mine in this area. The first use was to make uranium glass, like you see here on the right side. It was produced especially on the Czech side in Joachimsthal, today Jachimov. The elements polonium and radium were discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in the pitch blende of Joachimsthal shortly before the beginning of the 20th century. So it was an important geological important place for the development of uranium and uranium use. Even the discovery of radioactive springs led to the foundation of a lot of radium spars in the area, which are working until today, I have to say. After 1945, the Soviets occupied this area, and they immediately know that uranium was in this area, and so they started their research of uranium in the ore mounds. At that time, the Soviets itself didn't have enough uranium deposits. You know, we are shortly after the first American atomic bomb, and so the Russians tried to get as much of uranium ore as possible to create their own atomic program. For this, two companies were created, one in the Czech Republic, which was Czech and Soviet company, and the other one was founded in May of 1947 under the secret name Wismut in Moscow, but it was responsible for the German side of the uranium mining. In 1955, 54, it was changed in the Soviet German company, but it was totally under Soviet control. It has its own secret service, has its own state institutions, everything. It was a state within the state of the German Democratic Republic until 1990. With the German reunification, it became quite clear the Soviets sold this for 1 D-mark to the United Germany, and from that on, a large project under the name of Wismut GmbH started for the redevelopment and solving all the problems which were which came up by uranium mining in large dimensions. You have to remember these were the times of the Cold War, and it was very very important for the Soviets within the atomic race with the United States. And indeed, the first atomic bomb of the Russians was built with the uranium from this area. Okay, coming to 1919, the legacy of this uranium mining, you see here an overview, more than 450 old shafts, open shafts, 50 open shafts, 56, 2 processing plants, very large processing plants for yellowcake, 500 kilometers of underground workings, a lot of waste heaps with more than 3 million cubic meters, and of course the radiation slurries of 160 million cubic meters in the surrounding of these processing sites. And you can see here in the small graphic down that during the time from 1945 to 1990, the Wismut was the 3rd largest producer of uranium in the world, following after USA and Canada. So a lot of sites, hundreds of shafts, and a lot of buildings and waste heaps and underground structures and so on was left over by the Russians, who went away, and they left a nearly destroyed countryside landscape. Here are some expressions from this landscape, how it looked like. Large waste heaps full of radioactive materials, of course, destroyed cities. They, for uranium mining, they tear down whole city parts or whole cities. It's an area in the Ore Mountains where a lot of people lived, and still live, yes. And you can see the slurries and the processing plants which with dams who broke. There were several accidents, and the radioactive material was flushed into the rivers of the area and flushed through the whole country. So a heavily destroyed landscape. Yeah, what do we have of remains from this? Because after 1919, a redevelopment program started, which made quite clear all the sites have to be demolished. There should not be any sign of this development in the future. And we fight because it was an important part of history of Germany and the world. We fight for the preservation of some of these shafts and structures. You can see here some examples for above ground mining heritage. The most important is the shaft 371 at Hartenstein. It was once the deepest shaft of Europe with 2,000 meters depth, and it's full with all the machinery, everything is there. You see different structures. Interesting is on the right side down the Swanov shaft at Yachimov, which is still in use for pumping radium water for the spa in Yachimov. It's still in use. The others are not anymore in use, of course. Mostly the shafts are closed and filled and so on. But there's also a lot of underground heritage, as you can see here, galleries, draining tonnage. On the one here you see on the left above, he's more than 220 kilometers long in total. In its use today, until today, to clear the mining sites of former uranium mining. There are processing sites for clearing the water at the end and so on. So we have a lot of underground galleries. Still there, the remains of the processing sites. You can see here in the middle how it looks like in 1991, and today how it looks like today. On the other hand, on the left, you see this all. So there and the slurries and of the remains of the yellow cake factories, they're trying to clear up. They are putting special layers of textiles on it and giving earth above this, because these deposits will remain there for the next hundreds and thousands or 1,000 years. You cannot deposit it anywhere else. You have to control it for hundreds of years. Yes, this is waste, nuclear waste. And here on the left is an example for the dark heritage site of uranium mining in the Ore Mountains. This is the rest of a prison prisoners camp on the Czech side. Political prisoners were here worked to death because they had to produce yellow cake here under unbelievable conditions. And so it's one part. We took it into our project because it's another part of the story, and you cannot go over it. Yes. Yeah, but it was a state in the state with its own cultural sources, with all its own hospital, medical care system, with its own shops and so on. And we have a lot of these buildings in the area which are still there. You see here the Stalinistic style of the buildings of the 1950s, of the Wismut headquarters or the cultural palace at Chemnitz, which could just be preserved. It should be turned down, but now an investor is there. Or Wismut Minor Hospital, which is still in use as a hospital. So also these administrative and social structures are still there. Even a lot of things had been turned down. The landscape is the next aspect of this. The heap landscape, the redeveloped heaps in the area. At the spar of Bad Schlema, it was turned into a park landscape, and so on. And you can see the remediated landscape at Ronneburg, Thüringer. There was a big landscape exhibition of Germany in a few years ago. So the whole landscape was redeveloped and redesigned in this area. And an interesting point is the art collection of the Wismut. A lot of East German Volkseigene public-owned companies had their own art collections. Paintings made by professional painters, but also by the workers. So it's very interesting, and you see here the symbolism of the future, positive future of the nuclear age here in this painting, and in this wall. It's a ceramic wall on a building in this area. So, and even here in the other pictures, you see the close political connection of the Communist Party to the workers and to the miners and their traditions. Okay, I'm coming to an end. What kind of dimensions do these monuments of uranium time have? I think they have a heritage dimension. It's the first uranium landscape on the World Heritage List, which integrates all aspects of uranium mining processing, including all social, political, and environmental aspects and elements. Yes. The political dimension, it's standing for the importance of uranium production in Cold War times in the conflict between East and West. It's a symbol of the communist system in the second half of the 20th century. And it's also now, I would say, a political symbol in Germany and also in Czechia about how democratic systems deal with this legacy. Yes, and an ecological dimension, of course, because it's a symbol of the use of landscape and health of the workers and people until 1919, and a symbol of the great efforts of redeveloping and recultivating this heavily polluted region to make it as a living, a good living area for people of the present and the future. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for this very interesting and engaging presentation, Albert. It's very, very nice and also very visual. So, and then we turn to our last presenter, which is Sergei Mirny. Sergei is the founder of Chernobyl Tour and is also the founder and director of Chernobyl University. And some of you might actually remember Sergei from our 2019 conference in Barcelona. And we are very happy to have him here today again with us to provide a short intervention on the Chernobyl case. So, Sergei, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining me with this really frontline meeting on the issue, which is quite important nowadays and in many an aspect. And I would like to express my gratitude also for the speakers, because they quite, widened my mindset in terms of the nuclear heritage. What I will do right now, I will deliver you a brief report on what's going on with Chernobyl. And on its way from the Chernobyl, from nuclear disaster zone to the nuclear disaster, to the UNESCO World Heritage and international tourist destination. Okay, so well, inclusion of the Chernobyl object and sites into the UNESCO World Heritage is logical, well-grounded, and I would like to emphasize it, a mandatory step. First, for the accident aftermath mitigation, and for preserving and acquiring the Chernobyl experience by our civilization. Okay. So I would like to show you the distance from the initial explosion in 1986 to the present date landscape of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant's site, including a huge arch construction over the exploded unit and over the sarcophagus shelter which used to cover it. This is how the entrance to the Chernobyl NPP looked back in 1986, and it is how the entrance to the Chernobyl zone looked several years ago. And just for your information, in 2019, the last pre-pandemic year, the number of the Chernobyl tourists in just 1 year reached the mark of 125,000 in just 1 year. I would like to draw your special attention for the safety, radiation safety of the tools. It should be reminded that the radiation intensity of radiation and of radioactive contamination has reduced. For example, if you take gamma radiation, exactly 1,000 times. I can say it for sure from my experience of 1986 as an officer of radiation surveillance in the Chernobyl zone, in the very same spots and routes where now tourists go. And this is granted by, quite a system of measures. I would not go into details, but one should keep in mind that on some location, visitors have as much as 3 personal dosimeters issued by the tour operator, by the zone authority, and by the nuclear power plant. So finally, one-day tour results in the gamma irradiation dose equal just to roughly 1 or maybe 2-hour dose during flight at Airjet. And also I would like to emphasize that there is no internal irradiation, because we controlled the state of Chernobyl tool guides, and it has shown that they don't have any extra amount of radioactive cesium in their bodies. I would like to emphasize that the appearance of Chernobyl tourism and the start of conversion the Chernobyl zone into cultural heritage was academically predicted in my research of roughly year of 2000 about the Chernobyl liquidators' health. And in the appendix, as for what practically stems from this research, I suggested the project of the Chernobyl National Park. Later on, I called it as Memorial Cultural and Natural National Park. So here you see the first version of its type. And I also, of course, checked with the then existing updated radiation contamination maps, and I proved that such trips are safe. In almost quarter of century, it turned out that the Chernobyl tourism is not a singular event. It is a part, and I dare think a leader of the event, which of the phenomenon, global phenomenon, which I call the post-radiation accident tourism. Very rough name, but anyway, it works because it embraced Fukushima, first of all, nuclear disaster site, and also some other sites like nuclear test sites and the others, and because here you can see the town of Pripyat and its symbol, the nuclear power plant itself, I consider best monument to the Chernobyl liquidators, and also non-connected with the accident directly, but connected with the Cold War, the over-horizon radar, huge installation. As for the criteria which those objects meet, first of all, it's the criterion 6, which says about association with events of global outstanding significance, or to be an outstanding example of a type of building or ensemble or landscape which illustrates significant stage in human history. There are also some natural criteria, but I will skip it. And I would like, there is a list of such objects, and I would like to finally to mention problems which are on this way. This is the conflict of regular activities at the post-accident nuclear site, and also the interest of cultural and touristic interests. There are quite a lot of different actors involved. There are some national problems because Ukraine is a state in making. And because of this also we have some lack of submissions. And then there is a general phenomenon, principal novelty of such phenomena as the Chernobyl disaster. And so even UNESCO criteria, they somehow did not address this principle and new phenomena in terms of a combination of natural and cultural approach. And then finally, negative perception of the event, its heritage of radiation, and so on and so forth. But I hope that jointly we will be able partly resolve those problems, partly help each other in our practical activities and in research to overcome it. Thank you for your attention. And I hope that our conference will be a very, very productive one.
Thank you very, very much, Sergey. Can I maybe ask you to stop sharing your screen as well?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So now, normally you should have a full view of our panel. So then we can start the panel discussion. Actually, there's already quite a discussion going on, both in the chat and also in the Q&A. But I will start with the first question, which came to us in the chat, and I think it applies to almost all of the presentations that have been given, because it asks, when we look at the drivers to basically transform existing nuclear sites as heritage sites, what were these for the different examples shown? And we have seen lots of examples, so I would say, well, maybe pick one or two and discuss this mainly maybe from the second part of the question. Was there any kind of deliberate national policy or a deliberate driver in this transformation from a nuclear site to nuclear heritage? I see, Vladimir, that you have already raised your hand to answer this question.
Yes, I can provide some considerations if you don't mind. First of all, thank you for the question. It is a really good question to the point. I think that it's very country-specific. Approaches are very country-specific. And we can see also some differences between nuclear versus non-nuclear countries. And surprisingly, these differences may come to the similar solutions. So there are certainly large countries with large nuclear program that do have such a policy for nuclear heritage, because they are proud of the previous activities. I provided a couple of examples as well as Egle in our presentations. And we can see also examples of non-nuclear countries that also decided to preserve some previous facilities, previous activities. Maybe it is because they are proud on previous development and their contribution to the nuclear science worldwide. Typical example might be Italy, because there were famous Italian nuclear physicists that significantly contributed to nuclear area, not exactly in Italy, but in USA, for example, Enrico Fermi. And also this country is very specific because their significant cultural, historical development, I believe they even have some kind of ministry for preservation of historical heritage. And this approach probably is to some extent applied to the nuclear facilities. So just a couple of considerations on this good question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vladimir. I see that, well, others have raised their hands as well. I will go in the order that I see them on my screen. So Egle, I see that you want to react as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's really such a good question. Why do these initiatives to make, to institutionalize nuclear cultural heritage come from, and what kind of institutions or agencies support them? Again, the case that I know best is Russia, and it's very interesting because one would think about Russia as a very centralized state and society, and especially the Russian Nuclear Corporation as a state-run monopoly on the whole nuclear industry. And yet, when you look at every single specific object, which have been actually now listed formally as monuments of history and culture by the Ministry of Culture in Russia, the development as heritage would be initiated by the people who worked directly with those objects. So in case of Kurchatov's Memorial House, it would be his wife and his colleagues. In case of a nuclear icebreaker, Lenin, it would be the last captain commander of a ship. And in the case of Obninsk, again, it would be a group of scientists and engineers who worked on the site. But of course, to become part of national cultural heritage, other agencies are also needed. So Rosatom themselves, they established a historical cultural center, which is part of public relations department. And that center, they perform a very interesting role. So partially the rationale, the reason why they did it, of course, there was this understanding that if you have heritage sites which speak about the nuclear past and which are accessible to wide public and very importantly, children, then as an industry, you might, whitewash your contaminated brand, and you might come across as more open and accessible and more cultured, so to speak. So that's one thing. But another thing is that there is this huge interest from the nuclear community themselves to preserve the legacy, to kind of gift it to the future generations of nuclear scientists and engineers and society at large. So my point would be that those nuclear cultural heritage sites, we tend to be initiated not from the top, but really from below, from the nuclear engineers, scientists, residents in the area who then strive for recognition at the national policy level. And once they are recognized, then of course the new channels for funding, for support are open to develop those sites into very professional museums by hiring professional curators, historians, archaeologists, and so on.
Okay, many thanks, Egle, for this response. Sergey, I see that you have also raised your hand.
Okay, well, you know, in case of if Chernobyl, the drivers were totally non-governmental bodies. So, I would call them memorians, as it is called in historical science, applied history. You know, it was, you know, NGOs and businesses. And it is them whom I call, you know, the new generation of the liquidators of the long-term consequences. In 2017, it was me supported with my colleagues from Chernobyl Tour and from the Chernobyl Tourism Business Associations, who for the first time reported on the necessity and the possibility to include the Chernobyl sites into the UNESCO World Heritage List. And it took 2.5 years to make government, the state, to respond, you know, to accept this idea. And since then, the process, very slow process started. And at the moment, it is now at the stage of preparation of the tentative application. And the problem is that in case of nuclear heritage, and I believe that it's useful to know for all participants of our webinar, it demands unusually large array of authorities to be recognized, because usually it is only the Ministry of Culture. You know, and well, basically that's it, and local government. But in case in Chernobyl, in Ukrainian particular realities, we need Ministry of Culture, we need Ministry of the Environment, we need the state agency on the Chernobyl zone management, then radiation safety bodies, local authorities. And well, it's a lot, and of course the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which communicates to UNESCO, and it's a lot, you know, to make so big assembly of state, rather bureaucratic state bodies to work in unison to produce the final product. Thank you.
Okay, indeed, the problem of working with many on one issue. So then, Helmut, I see that you also want to respond.
Yes, in our case, it was a bottom-up project. It would never have been realized. The whole project of the Ormon's cultural landscape would never have been realized when we weren't possible to bring the people into the project, because the government was against it. You know about this case of the bridge in Dresden, the reason why Dresden lost the World Heritage title, and from this point on, the government was against the project, but we were able to bring together all the municipalities and all the people of the region, so that at least the government has to give up. Yes, and in the uranium case, it were the basic of this development was the association of the former uranium workers, which are very well organized and which fight for their monuments and for the history of their work. They are very proud of it. But I have to make one remark to Sergey. If you want to become a World Heritage Site, you cannot use criterion 6 alone. You know, it's an additional criteria. You have to take one of the 1 to 5 criteria, at least one. And from my experience, I can tell you, have a story, a good history, even good monuments, you need some experts in the terminology and the process of becoming a World Heritage, because otherwise you got lost in this process. Yes, so you have to talk to people who who know how the UNESCO process works. Yes, because only to have a good history and a great history and to have nice monuments, this is not enough to become a World Heritage Site.
Well, thank you for this insight. And I think it also shows that organizing this webinar might also have very practical consequences in terms of interchanging information and maybe collaborating in the future as well. Sergey, I see that you raised your hand, so maybe very, very shortly to respond to this, and then we can move on to the next.
Sure. Many thanks for your suggestion, but well, I do understand it's a complicated bureaucratic process which needs professionals, and we are, you know, incorporating them in the process. But as for the criterion 6, I am to point out that actually there are, I guess, 12 or so sites which received the UNESCO World Heritage status, cultural heritage status, only and exceptionally on this criteria, and they are so so prominent for our civilization as Hiroshima dome site, Hiroshima bombardment site, and on the other side, for example, Oswiecim, Auschwitz extermination camp. But also the whole of independence in the state. They are not only negative, so to say, events with negative connotation. So there are exceptions. But
sorry. Yeah. A short answer. You are correct, but this is a long time ago. These nominations, the policy of the UNESCO is changing, and this is an important point.
Correct.
Shows indeed the complexity and institutional challenges that we are discussing here today. So maybe for our next topic, well, it's actually maybe a quite, you could say, provocative question, which also touches upon something that Egle already hinted at, with this the whitewashing idea. So do you think that wider access to nuclear heritage facilities could also change the bad PR that the nuclear industry has received? Would basically having wider access to nuclear heritage be a sort of solution for this sort of bad PR? Anyone who wants to take a go at this question? I see, Vladimir, that you're raising your hand, so go.
Well, I can just say that it is not the only one magic solution, but it can certainly contribute to improvement of bad PR of nuclear technology, nuclear industry in some specific countries. That's only my.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for your vision, Egle. You also wanted to respond?
Yes, very briefly, and I really wanted to say something similar to what Vladimir said. Obviously, much of interest from the inside of industry, public relations or communication departments are driven by this idea that they can improve their image, because that's the terms in which they think. That's how information management or engagement with stakeholders has been structured professionally in those particular departments for such a long time. And I would like to see actually more growing awareness of all the different socially and politically important things that heritage perspective could do to actually improve the way in which the nuclear industry at large operates. So it's not just about the image. Ideally, it's about seeing itself differently, its own place in society, engaging with a society through different professionals, like curators, humanities and social science scholars, tourism guides, and so on. So these are very different collaborators. But it's also about thinking more structurally about preservation and information management inside the industry. So the radioactive waste is one thing in its management, but also the modernization and update of nuclear facilities, how the information about what's actually happening inside, which is operational, how it could be better captured, maybe by using heritage methods, and better communicated between different generations of employees and internationally as well. So maybe I could return the question again to other speakers, and I would be very much interested to hear more. What role international organizations, in your view, could have in raising this awareness about the potential of cultural heritage inside the nuclear industry?
Okay, thank you, Egle. Well, that's also something that, of course, anyone can comment upon it. So raise your hand if you have any ideas on that. But I see, Sergey, that you also raised your hand.
Yeah, yes, correct. You know, I have always this problem when bringing people to the Chernobyl zone, and my vision is that actually the legacy as such is kind of ambivalent, you know. And I always state that I am neither pro-nuclear, neither anti-nuclear when I show the Chernobyl disaster. I try to show it as it is, to help citizens and authorities to make really well-informed choices, but not based on obsolete concepts or on outright misses. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. So then a question from Jan Haverkamp from Greenpeace. I think it's really directed to Cornelius' presentation as well. So he asks, how does this idea of waste disposal as heritage, as you presented, Cornelius, fit with the principle that some stakeholders at least are defending of, well, forgetting about this waste for eternity? So I see that also in chat, there's already quite some discussion on this, but you can, of course, also respond now in live, Cornelius.
Yeah, you probably all read my response in the chat. It's of course a very interesting question, and I think the point to make, which I think Jan also agrees with, is that forgetting and memory go together. I mean, they're two sides of the same coin, and both of them are challenging to manage. I mean, that's why we are archaeologists, because there isn't an established memory that everybody already has. Every generation needs to remember and to forget. Again, and translate what we find and what we discover and what is given to us, translate it into new terms, and then eventually pass on something else. So one of the arguments that we have presented in recent years is that we see nuclear waste and including spent fuel as a particular category of cultural heritage, because it fulfills many of the criteria that are commonly applied to cultural heritage. That's a long argument, but essentially this is also something we leave after us for future generations, except that we don't want them to consume it. We rather want to keep them safe. So it's a different set of values, but otherwise there are a lot of similarities between nuclear waste that will be with us for a long time to come, and more traditional cultural heritage. But it's all about managing forgetting and managing memory, and there are no easy answers to that, but this is an example that helps us understanding the subtleties and the relation between these two in new ways, and this is something we have tried to explore in recent years. But maybe Jan also wants, I know Jan can't talk, right? What a pity. Then we maybe see if one of the others on the panel can talk, wants to talk.
Indeed, unfortunately, the participants cannot talk, so they have to talk through the chat. And I see that Jan is doing this quite well. He has really discovered the chat and the Q&A function. So, but unfortunately, he cannot use his microphone. I don't know whether anyone else in the panel wants to react on this discussion on, well, remembering and forgetting and how they relate. I see nobody immediately raising their hand, so I will move to a next question, which also, again, I think relates to this idea of institutional support. So also here, if we're talking about radioactive waste, what kind of institutional support is there available, and is there enough institutional support For example, when we're talking about, well, data registration related to what is going on at disposal sites or what is going to be disposed of in these disposal sites and how we can care for this information. So what kind of institutional support is there available at the moment? And also what kind of institutional support could be there for keeping heritage into the future, you could say, and more particularly information into the future? Anyone who wants to have a first go at that topic? I see Vladimir, you again raised your hand first. So Vladimir, I give the floor to you.
I will, I will be just short, and I will provide clearly technical view. In many countries, it's a good practice that they are established specific radioactive waste management organizations. In many countries, there are also decommissioning and waste management organizations. And of course, that if waste are going to do disposal, there must be full record about it. It is either low or intermediate level disposal, or in some countries they are already in preparation for high level waste disposals. So this information exists. Maybe there is not so much a nuclear heritage view, but it is a certainly collection of professional information about waste, about packages, about origin of the waste. So this information is available. Yeah, but what will happen with this in future, even in the far future, it is another question.
Thank you, Vladimir. Egle?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. And it's really a very good one. As Vladimir said, this information is available, but that doesn't mean that it is quite perfect. And for example, in the UK, there are very interesting initiatives of improving that information gathering process precisely by using the heritage strategies. So Vladimir and I showed the image of Dunray nuclear power plant. And the first time ever, I think, that heritage perspective was made part of the official decommissioning strategy happened in the case of Dunray. And one of the reasons why that happened is because it was a way of improving the working with the archives and finding information which is necessary for decommissioning and going through the radioactive waste that has accumulated during the operation of the site. So the documentation is being, so to speak, reorganized and expanded during the decommissioning process. And the Dunray experience made it very clear that the whole nuclear decommissioning process in the UK could benefit a lot from heritage perspective. So namely working with professional archivists and gathering information from different sources. So not just documents, but also oral history with the people who actually operated the facility back in time. So this is really, really interesting. And I think that this also should not be forgotten when talking about these more kind of traditional heritage forms as making a museum or creating a cultural heritage site. I think that these efforts should come together in terms of institutional framework. It would be a missed opportunity to have these cultural heritage projects like museums or preservations of elements of material infrastructures as coming from local or national cultural budgets, and then radioactive waste management as coming from the new decommissioning budgets. So it would be good to have at least discussion about developing new funding schemes for those multidisciplinary, multi-institutional perspectives. And I think that this is what SHARE as a network is a very good context to talk about. But it's also about raising awareness inside the nuclear industry. And I'm very much looking forward for the international organizations in the sector to continue doing work towards that purpose.
Thank you, Egle. Maybe I can shortly, because Jan is also responding in the chat, I can shortly read it out. So he is actually speaking to you through my mouth. So he states that the information part of the question has to be covered by the industry according to the polluter pays principle, and then the lessons learned part is more of a public part, and it is a matter, or it is better than that, that is financed independently via public budgets. And then Helmut, I see that you have raised your hand, so I will give the word to you for a final comment.
Yes, we are facing in Germany a very interesting development, because we are the first state who steps out of nuclear power systems and anything. And at the same time, we decided to step out of lignite mining and out of brown coal power plants and so on. But the interesting point is, for these lignite thing, there's in the moment a very large development coming up from the heritage administrations of different parts in Germany to make an overview about all materials which are existing about this, beginning with the monuments, up to the archives, up to everything, data and so on, to collect this with a large staff of people. Nothing happened for uranium in this in the same case, because I've talked to many German heritage administrators, and they have a fear about preserving, for example, nuclear power plants, because they are thinking about the costs and so on. But the German government is giving a lot of money for these brown coal and lignite project, but nothing for uranium heritage. And I think this is really a problem.
Yeah, very interesting observation. I will also have this as then the final comment, because we are getting close to 6 o'clock, and I want to give the word finally to Egle, who organized the session together with the SHARE platform, to give some final comments and ideas.
Thank you very much, Robert, and really big thanks to all speakers for managing to say so much in such a short period of time. And I hope that everyone has learned that nuclear cultural heritage is not just about culture, and it's not just about history, but it's actually about many different institutions trying to work together. And this is a really new situation that the sector is facing, that the speakers have detailed so very eloquently and beautifully. I just wanted to say that if any of you are interested in continuing this kind of conversation, please kindly get in touch either with me or the organizers of the session. And I would be very happy to put you on the mailing list of New Spaces research project, which is going to study the process of decommissioning and cultural heritage in the UK, Sweden, and Lithuania. But of course, we want to address those countries in the larger European and global context. So thank you once again very much.
Okay, and then I will end this session again with some words of thanks. First of all, of course, to our panelists for providing these very insightful presentations and this engaging panel discussion. And also, of course, to the audience who has been here with us and has provided us with different questions and insights, and also the people behind the screens who have made this possible, both the SHARE platform for supporting this, and then also, of course, those making the web connection and the chat moderation possible. So many thanks to all of you. And if you want to have any further engagement on this, feel free to contact us, of course. And you can always engage again with this particular presentation on the SHARE and the RICOMET websites after this event. So many thanks, and see you hopefully in the next days on other RICOMET presentations and sessions. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.